A clear, uncluttered, bright, and powerful consciousness needs frequent rest periods if its efficiency is to be maintained, and if it is to correctly interpret reality. Otherwise, it distorts what is perceived. Rest, or sleep, cures. Very extended sleep periods have been helpful for therapy in some cases, not because extended sleep in itself is beneficial, but because so many toxins have been built up that such extended periods were required. Learning processes are definitely hampered through your present habits, for there are certain periods when consciousness is attuned to learning, and yet you try to force learning during unrecognized minimal periods. Creative and psychic abilities are thrust into the background simply because of this artificial division. Dualities result that affect all of your activities. In some cases, you literally force yourself to sleep when your consciousness could be at one of its maximum points. This is, incidentally, in the pre-dawn period. In certain afternoon hours, consciousness is lowered and needs refreshment that is instead denied. If stages of waking consciousness were examined as sleep stages are presently being examined, for example, you would find a much greater activity than is suspected. Certain transition stages are completely ignored. In many ways, it can be said that consciousness does indeed flicker and varies in intensities. It is not like a steady beam of light, for instance. Consciousness has many characteristics, some, of course, known to you. Many of the characteristics of consciousness, however, are not so apparent, since presently, you largely use your consciousness in such a way that its perceptions appear in quite other than natural guises. You are aware of your own consciousness, in other words, through the medium of your own physical mechanism. You are not nearly as aware of your own consciousness when it is not operating primarily through the mediumship of the body as it does out-of-body states and some dissociated conditions. The characteristics of consciousness are the same, whether you are in a body or outside of one. The peaks and valleys of consciousness that I mentioned exist to some degree in all consciousness, despite the form adopted after death. The nature of your consciousness is no different basically than it is now, though you may not be aware of many of its characteristics. Now, your consciousness is telepathic and clairvoyant, for example, even though you may not realize it. In sleep, when you often presume yourself to be unconscious, you may be far more conscious than you are now, but simply using abilities of consciousness that you do not accept as real or valid in waking life. You therefore shut them out of your conscious experience. Consciousness, yours and mine, is quite independent of both time and space. And after death, you are simply aware of the greater powers of consciousness that exist within you all the time. Since they do, of course, you can discover them now and learn to use them. This will directly assist you in after-death experience. You will not nearly be so startled by the nature of your own reactions if you understand beforehand, for example, that your consciousness not only is not imprisoned by your physical body, but can create other portions at will. Those who over-identify their consciousness with their body can suffer self-created torment for no reason, lingering about the body. Indeed, quite the forlorn soul, thinking it has no other place to go. You are, as I said earlier, a spirit now, and that spirit has a consciousness. The consciousness belongs to the spirit then, but the two are not the same. The spirit may turn its consciousness off and on. By its nature, consciousness may flicker and fluctuate, but the spirit does not. I do not particularly like the word spirit because of several implications attached to it, but it suits our purposes in that the word does imply an independence from physical form. Consciousness does not refresh itself in sleep. It is merely turned in another direction. Consciousness does not sleep then in those terms, and while it may be turned off, it is not like a light. Turning it off does not extinguish it in a way that a light disappears when a switch is turned. Following the analogy, if consciousness were like a light that belonged to you, even when you switched it off, there would be sort of a twilight, but not darkness. The spirit, therefore, is never in a state of nothingness with its consciousness extinguished. It is very important, therefore, that such is realized. Earlier, I said that you are only familiar with those characteristics of your own consciousness that you use through the mediumship of the body. You rely upon the body to express the perceptions of your consciousness. You tend, again, to identify the expression of your consciousness with the body. Yet, consciousness can be allowed to retreat and to some degree begin to cut off its physical expression. You would not be aware consciously of this permission simply because this kind of demonstration could not be held if the normal waking consciousness knew. You would automatically be frightened. This could be an exercise, actually, in the manipulation of consciousness. Close to death, the same sort of thing happens in varying degrees when the consciousness realizes that it can no longer express itself through the mediumship of the body. If the person dying over-identifies with the body, then he can easily panic, thinking that all expression is therefore cut off, and for that matter, that his consciousness is about to be extinguished. Such a belief in extinction, such a certainty that identity is about to be blotted out in the next moment, is a severe psychological experience that in itself can bring about unfortunate reactions. What happens instead is that you find consciousness quite intact and its expression far less limited than it was before. We will be dealing now, after what I hope is suitable background material, with some chapters on the nature of existence after physical death, at the point of death, and involving the final physical death at the end of the reincarnational cycle. It is important that you understand something about the nature and behavior of your own consciousness before we begin. This marks the end of Chapter 8 of the Eternal Validity of the Soul, Sleep, Dreams, and Consciousness. If you have not heard the previous selections from this chapter, I will put them in a playlist so they will be easy to access. What did you think about this final passage? Leave your opinion in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like, sharing with a friend, and subscribing for more. And as always, thank you.